I always thought I knew my wife. 32 years of marriage, and I could have sworn there wasn't a secret left between us. We'd built a life together, raised 2 children, weathered storms, and celebrated triumphs. I knew the way she liked her coffee black, 2 sugars. I knew the way she'd hum under her breath when she was nervous, the way she'd tap her fingers on the steering wheel when she was thinking. I knew the scent of her perfume, the cadence of her laughter, the warmth of her hand in mine. Or at least, I thought I did. It's strange, the things you notice after someone is gone. The house felt emptier than I'd ever imagined possible. Her shoes still lined up by the door, her favorite mug on the kitchen counter, a half-finished crossword puzzle on the living room table. I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to text her, to ask if she needed anything from the store, only to remember again that she wouldn't answer. Grief is a strange companion. It sneaks up on you in the quiet moments, in the spaces where someone used to be. It was a rainy Thursday when I finally worked up the courage to go through her things. Our daughter, Emily, had offered to help, but I told her I needed to do it alone. There was something sacred about the task, a final act of intimacy. I started with her closet, folding sweaters that still smelled faintly of lavender, sorting through scarves and old birthday cards tucked into drawers. I found a shoebox filled with ticket stubs and postcards from trips we'd taken, each one a tiny time capsule. I smiled at the memory of our honeymoon in Paris, the way she'd insisted on climbing every single step of the Eiffel Tower, even though she was terrified of heights. It wasn't until I reached her purse that I found the letter. It was tucked into a side pocket, folded neatly, the paper yellowed with age. My first thought was that it was a grocery list or maybe an old note from one of the kids. But when I unfolded it, I saw my wife's handwriting, elegant, looping, unmistakable. The date at the top caught my eye, June 14th, 1991. That was the summer after we'd gotten married, the year we bought our first house. My hands trembled as I read the first line. To the one I never stopped loving. My heart pounded in my chest. The words felt foreign, as if they belonged to someone else's story. I read on, each sentence unraveling a thread I hadn't known was loose. She wrote about a man named Daniel, about a love that had ended before it began, about choices and regrets, and the life she'd built in the aftermath. She wrote about me, too, about the comfort and safety she'd found in our marriage, about the gratitude she felt for the family we'd created. But there was an undercurrent of longing, a sense of unfinished business. I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands. I read it once, twice, 3 times, searching for some clue, some explanation. Who was Daniel? Why had she kept this letter all these years? Why had she never told me? The questions swirled in my mind, each one heavier than the last. I thought about confronting her, about asking her the questions that now burned in my chest. But she was gone. There would be no answers, no explanations, no chance to fill in the gaps. I felt a wave of anger, sharp and unexpected. How could she keep something like this from me? How could she let me believe I was the only one? But beneath the anger was something softer, something sadder. I realized that I'd never really known the whole of her. I'd known the part she'd chosen to share, the pieces she'd let me see. But there were corners of her heart that had remained closed, secrets she'd carried alone. I wondered if that was true for all of us, if we ever really know the people we love. The rain tapped against the window, a steady rhythm that matched the ache in my chest. I folded the letter and placed it back in her purse, unsure of what to do next. Part of me wanted to forget I'd ever found it, to pretend that nothing had changed. But another part of me knew that wasn't possible. The letter was a crack in the foundation of my understanding, a reminder that love is never as simple as we want it to be. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I replayed memories in my mind, searching for signs I'd missed, moments that might have hinted at another life, another love. I thought about the way she'd sometimes stare out the window, lost in thought, or the way she'd smile at old songs on the radio. Had she been thinking of him? Had she been longing for something she'd lost? I wanted to be angry, to feel betrayed. But all I felt was a deep, aching sadness. I missed her. I missed the version of her I thought I knew, the life I thought we'd shared. But I also missed the chance to know her fully, to understand the parts of her she'd kept hidden. In the days that followed, I found myself returning to the letter, reading it over and over, searching for meaning. I wondered if Daniel was still alive, if he knew how she'd felt. I wondered if I should try to find him, to fill in the blanks she'd left behind. But I was afraid of what I might discover, afraid of what it might mean for the life we'd built. The days blurred together after that. Grief has a way of distorting time, stretching some moments into eternity and compressing others into a single, indistinct blur. I went through the motions answering condolence calls, writing thank you notes for casseroles and sympathy cards, trying to keep up with the bills and the endless paperwork that comes with death. But beneath it all, the letter pulsed like a hidden wound. I found myself thinking about it at odd times, in the grocery store, while folding laundry, in the quiet hours before dawn when the house was still and the ache of her absence was sharpest. I didn't tell anyone about the letter. Not Emily, not our son Ben, not even my oldest friend Tom, who'd known us both since college. It felt too raw, too private, as if speaking the words aloud would make them more real. Instead, I carried the secret with me, a silent companion that colored every memory, every conversation. I wondered if people could see it on my face, if they could sense the shift in me. I wondered if they'd ever truly known us at all. One afternoon, about a week after I found the letter, Emily stopped by. She brought groceries and a stack of mail, her arms full and her face drawn with worry. She'd always been the caretaker, the one who made sure everyone was fed and safe and loved. She bustled around the kitchen, putting things away, asking gentle questions about how I was holding up. I tried to answer honestly, but the words felt hollow. I could see the concern in her eyes, the way she watched me when she thought I wasn't looking. "Dad," she said finally, her voice soft, "you don't have to do this alone. You know that, right?" I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I know, sweetheart. I need some time." She hugged me then, holding on a little longer than usual. I wondered if she sensed the distance, the way I'd pulled back since her mother's death. I wanted to tell her about the letter, to share the burden, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. It felt like a betrayal, both of my wife and of the life we'd built together. After Emily left, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the letter. I traced the lines of my wife's handwriting, the loops and flourishes that had once seemed so familiar. I tried to imagine her writing it, tried to picture the expression on her face, the thoughts running through her mind. Was she sad, regretful, hopeful? I realized I had no idea. The woman I'd loved for more than 3 decades had been a mystery in ways I'd never understood. That night, I dreamed of her. In the dream, she was young again, her hair long and loose around her shoulders, her eyes bright with laughter. We were dancing in the living room, the way we used to when the kids were little and the world felt safe. She leaned in close, her lips brushing my ear. "There's so much you don't know," she whispered. I woke with a start, the words echoing in the darkness. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living in limbo, caught between the life I thought I'd had and the reality the letter had revealed. I needed answers, even if they hurt. I started by searching through her things again, this time with a different purpose. I looked for clues, old photographs, letters, anything that might shed light on Daniel and the part he'd played in her life. I found a box of letters in the back of her closet, tied with a faded blue ribbon. Most were from me, written during our early years together, silly, earnest declarations of love, promises for the future. But tucked among them was a single envelope, addressed in a different hand. The return address was smudged, but I could make out the name, Daniel Harper. My heart pounded as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, dated just a few weeks before our wedding. Daniel wrote of heartbreak, of letting go, of wishing her happiness in her new life. He wrote about the pain of losing her, about the memories they'd shared, about the hope that she'd find the love she deserved. It was tender, bittersweet, and full of longing. I read the letter twice, then a third time, trying to reconcile the man described in those pages with the woman I'd known. Had she loved him more than she'd loved me? Had she ever truly let him go? The questions gnawed at me, each one more painful than the last. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, replaying memories, searching for signs. I thought about the way she'd sometimes grow quiet during anniversaries, the way she'd look away when certain songs played on the radio. Had those moments been about him? Had I been blind to the truth all these years? That evening, I sat on the porch, watching the rain fall in silver sheets. I thought about calling Emily, about sharing what I'd found, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and stared out into the darkness, the letter heavy in my lap. I realized then that I had a choice. I could let the past consume me, let the secrets and regrets define the years we'd shared, or I could try to understand, to forgive, to find peace in the life we'd built together. I didn't know which path I'd choose, but for the first time since her death, I felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I could find a way forward. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains, the kind of golden light that makes everything look softer, gentler. For a moment, I forgot about the letter, about Daniel, about the ache that had settled in my chest. I just lay there, listening to the birds outside, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. But reality crept back in, as it always does. The letter was still there, tucked into my nightstand, a silent reminder that my life was not as simple as I'd believed. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from my mug. I thought about the choices I'd made, the paths I'd taken, the moments that had led me here. I wondered if my wife had felt the same way, if she'd ever questioned the life we'd built together. I wondered if she'd been happy, truly happy, or if there had always been a part of her that longed for something or someone else. I decided to go for a walk, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. The neighborhood was quiet, the streets still damp from last night's rain. I passed houses I'd known for decades, neighbors who'd watched our children grow up, who'd brought casseroles and flowers when my wife died. I nodded to Mrs. Jenkins, who was watering her roses, and to Mr. Patel, who waved from his porch. Their kindness was a comfort, a reminder that I was not alone, even if I felt that way sometimes. As I walked, I found myself thinking about Daniel. Who was he? What had he meant to my wife? I realized I knew almost nothing about him, other than what I'd read in the letter. I wondered if he was still alive, if he'd moved on, if he ever thought about her. The curiosity gnawed at me, a restless itch I couldn't ignore. When I got home, I sat down at my computer and typed Daniel Harper into the search bar. It felt strange, almost intrusive, to be digging into my wife's past like this. But I couldn't help myself. I needed to know. The search returned dozens of results. LinkedIn profiles, Facebook pages, old news articles. I scrolled through them, looking for anything that might connect him to my wife. After an hour, I found a profile that seemed promising. The photo was old, but the eyes were familiar, kind, thoughtful, a little sad. The profile listed a hometown that matched the return address on the letter. My heart pounded as I clicked through the photos, searching for any sign of my wife. There were none, but I found a post from a few years ago, a tribute to a woman named Anna, describing her as the one who got away. The words echoed the letter I'd found, the same sense of longing and regret. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. I wondered if I should reach out, if I should try to contact him. Part of me wanted answers, closure, a way to make sense of everything I'd discovered. But another part of me was afraid of what I might learn, afraid of reopening wounds that had never fully healed. That afternoon, Ben called. He lives across the country, busy with work and his own family, but he checks in every few days. We talked about the kids, about his job, about the little things that make up a life. I almost told him about the letter, about Daniel, but I stopped myself. I didn't want to burden him, didn't want to shatter his image of his mother. Instead, I asked about his plans for the summer, about when he might visit next. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet house, feeling the weight of the secret pressing down on me. I realized that grief is not just about losing someone. It's about losing the future you thought you'd have, the certainty you thought you knew. It's about learning to live with questions that may never have answers. That evening, I pulled out the old photo albums, flipping through page after page of memories. There she was, my wife, laughing on the beach, holding our newborn daughter, dancing in the kitchen. I studied her face, searching for signs of sadness, of longing, of secrets. But all I saw was love, love for me, for our children, for the life we'd built together. I realized then that the past, with all its mysteries and regrets, did not erase the years we'd shared. Whatever she'd felt for Daniel, whatever secrets she'd kept, she had chosen me. She had chosen our life, our family, our future. And that choice mattered. I closed the album and sat in the quiet, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. The letter was still there, the questions still unanswered, but they no longer felt as urgent, as painful. I realized that I could honor her memory without needing to know every detail, every secret. I could choose to remember the love we'd shared, the life we'd built, the family we'd created. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I whispered a quiet thank you to my wife for the years we'd shared, to Daniel for loving her when I could not, and to myself for finding the strength to let go. The next few days passed, in a kind of gentle limbo. I found myself moving more slowly, as if the world had shifted on its axis and I was still learning how to walk again. I went about my routines, watering the garden, reading the newspaper, making dinner for one. The house was quieter than ever, the silence broken only by the ticking of the old clock in the hallway and the distant hum of traffic outside. I tried to fill the emptiness with small comforts, a favorite book, a walk in the park, a phone call with Emily, but always, in the back of my mind, the letter lingered. One afternoon, I decided to visit the cemetery. I hadn't been back since the funeral, and the thought of standing at her grave filled me with a strange mix of dread and longing. I bought a bouquet of lilies, her favorite, and drove out to the small, tree-lined cemetery on the edge of town. The sky was overcast, the air heavy with the promise of rain. I found her headstone easily, a simple marker with her name and the dates of her birth and death. I knelt and placed the flowers at the base, brushing away a few stray leaves. For a long time I just sat there, listening to the wind in the trees, the distant call of a mourning dove. I spoke to her then, quietly, telling her about the days since she'd been gone, about the kids, about the letter. I told her I missed her, that I wished I could ask her all the questions that now haunted me. As I spoke, I felt a strange sense of release, as if the act of saying the words aloud made them less heavy. I realized that I was not angry anymore, not really. I was sad, yes, and confused, but the sharp edge of betrayal had dulled. I understood, in a way I hadn't before, that love is complicated, that people are complicated, and that sometimes the things we carry are too heavy to share. On the drive home, I thought about Daniel again. I wondered what kind of man he was, what kind of life he'd lived. I wondered if he'd ever found happiness, if he'd ever let go of the love he'd lost. I thought about reaching out, about writing him a letter or sending an email. But I hesitated. What would I say? What did I hope to gain? Would it bring me peace, or only more questions? That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper in front of me. I tried to write, to put my thoughts into words, but nothing came. Every sentence felt wrong, too raw, too vulnerable. I realized that maybe I wasn't ready, not yet. Maybe I never would be. Instead, I poured myself another glass of whiskey and sat on the porch, watching the rain begin to fall. The world felt smaller, quieter, but also somehow more manageable. I thought about the life I'd shared with my wife, about the memories we'd made, the family we'd built. I thought about the secrets we'd kept, the things we'd left unsaid. I realized that, in the end, we are all mysteries to each other, no matter how close we are. The next morning, I woke to a text from Emily. "Thinking of you today, Dad. Let me know if you need anything." I smiled, grateful for her steady presence, her quiet strength. I texted back, "I'm okay, just taking it one day at a time." Later that day, I decided to go through the attic. It was a task I'd been putting off for years, a place where old boxes and forgotten memories gathered dust. I climbed the narrow stairs, the air thick with the scent of cedar and old paper. I found boxes labeled Christmas, kids, art, old photos. I opened each one, sorting through the detritus of a life well lived. In one box I found a stack of journals, my wife's, I realized, from the dates on the covers. My heart pounded as I flipped through the pages, unsure if I was ready to read her private thoughts, but curiosity won out. I sat on the floor, the journals spread around me, and began to read. The entries were ordinary at first, notes about the kids, grocery lists, reminders to call her mother, But as I read on, I found passages that spoke of longing, of regret, of a love that had never quite faded. She wrote about Daniel, about the pain of letting him go, about the way his memory lingered in the quiet moments. But she also wrote about me, about the comfort and safety she'd found in our marriage, about the joy of raising our children, about the gratitude she felt for the life we'd built. I realized then that her love for me was real, even if it was complicated. She had chosen me, chosen our life, even as she carried the memory of another. I felt a wave of relief, a sense of acceptance. I understood, finally, that love is not a zero-sum game. We can love more than one person, in different ways, at different times. And that doesn't diminish the love we share with those who are closest to us. As the rain tapped against the attic window, I closed the journal and sat in the quiet, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in weeks. I whispered a quiet thank you to my wife, for her honesty, for her love, for the life we'd shared. The following day, I found myself thinking about the nature of secrets. How many do we all carry, tucked away in the corners of our hearts? I wondered if my children would one day find something of mine, a letter, a photograph, a journal entry, that would make them question everything they thought they knew about me. The thought was both unsettling and oddly comforting. Maybe it was simply part of being human, this tendency to keep certain truths to ourselves, to protect the people we love from the full weight of our histories. I spent the morning in the garden, pulling weeds and trimming the rose bushes. My wife had always loved this time of year, when the first blooms appeared and the air was thick with the scent of earth and new life. I found myself talking to her as I worked, telling her about the things I'd discovered, the questions I still carried. I told her about the journals, about the letter from Daniel, about the way my understanding of our life had shifted. I asked her for forgiveness for not knowing, for not asking, for not seeing the parts of her that she'd kept hidden. As I worked, I felt a sense of connection, as if she were there beside me, her hands in the soil, her laughter drifting on the breeze. I realized that grief is not just about loss. It's about transformation. It's about learning to carry someone with you, even after they're gone. It's about finding new ways to love them, new ways to honor their memory. That afternoon, I sat down at my desk and wrote a letter to Daniel. I didn't know if I would ever send it, but the act of writing felt necessary, a way to give shape to the thoughts that had been swirling in my mind. I told him about my wife, about the life we'd built, about the love we'd shared. I told him about the letter I'd found, about the questions it had raised, about the peace I was beginning to find. I thanked him for loving her, for being a part of her story, for helping to shape the woman I'd loved. When I finished, I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. I felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. I realized that I didn't need to send it, didn't need to seek answers from the past. What mattered was the life I'd lived, the love I'd given, the memories I'd made. That evening, Emily called. She wanted to know if I'd like to come over for dinner, to spend some time with her and the kids. I hesitated at first, unsure if I was ready to be around people, to pretend that everything was normal. But something in her voice, gentle, insistent, made me say yes. Her house was warm and noisy, filled with the chaos of young children and the smell of roasting chicken. I watched as my grandchildren played on the living room floor, their laughter bright and unburdened. Emily moved through the kitchen with the same quiet competence her mother had possessed, her hands sure and steady as she chopped vegetables and stirred sauces. After dinner, as the kids watched a movie in the next room, Emily and I sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes searching. "Dad," she said quietly, "are you really okay?" I hesitated, unsure how much to share. I wanted to protect her, to shield her from the complexities of adult love and loss. But I also knew that honesty was a kind of gift, a way to bridge the distance that had grown between us. "I'm getting there," I said finally. "It's been hard. I've learned some things about your mom that I didn't expect. But I think I'm starting to understand her better, and maybe myself too." Emily reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "She loved you, Dad." "I know she did." I nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "I know, and I loved her. That's what matters." We sat in silence for a while, the only sound a distant murmur of the television. I realized then that healing is not a destination, but a journey, a series of small steps, of moments of connection and understanding. I knew there would be more hard days ahead, more questions, more grief. But I also knew that I was not alone. When I got home that night, I stood in the doorway for a long time, listening to the quiet. The house felt different, still empty, still marked by her absence, but also filled with the echoes of love and laughter. I realized that I could choose what to carry forward, what to let go, what to honor. I went to bed with a sense of peace, knowing that the past would always be a part of me, but that it did not have to define my future. The next morning, I woke to the sound of rain against the window, a gentle patter that seemed to echo the rhythm of my thoughts. I lay in bed for a while, listening, letting the memories wash over me. I thought about the early days of our marriage, the way we'd huddled together in our tiny first apartment, dreaming about the future. I remembered the arguments, the reconciliations, the quiet moments of contentment. I realized that every marriage is a tapestry of joy and sorrow, of secrets and revelations, of love that endures even when it is tested. I got up and made coffee, the familiar ritual grounding me. As I sipped from her favorite mug, I found myself thinking about the journals I'd discovered in the attic. I hadn't read them all. There were still years, worth of entries, stories I hadn't yet uncovered. Part of me was afraid of what I might find, but another part was curious, eager to know more about the woman I'd loved. I spent the morning reading, moving slowly through the pages. Some entries were mundane lists of chores, notes about the kids, recipes she wanted to try. Others were more introspective, filled with reflections on motherhood, marriage, and the passage of time. I was struck by her honesty, by the way she grappled with her own doubts and fears. She wrote about feeling overwhelmed, about moments of loneliness, about the pressure to be everything to everyone. But there were also entries that spoke of joy, of the pride she felt watching our children grow, of the comfort she found in our routines, of the gratitude she felt for the life we'd built. She wrote about me, too, about the ways I made her laugh, the ways I frustrated her, the ways I made her feel safe. I realized that our marriage had been real, messy, imperfect, and beautiful. As I read, I found another mention of Daniel. It was brief, almost an afterthought, a note about running into him at the grocery store, years after their relationship had ended. She wrote about the awkwardness of the encounter, about the flood of memories it brought back, about the relief she felt when she returned home to me. She wrote, "I chose my life. I chose my family. I chose love, even when it was hard." Those words stayed with me all day. I realized that love is not a single moment, but a series of choices, some easy, some difficult, all meaningful. My wife had chosen me again and again, even as she carried the memory of another. I felt a surge of gratitude, a sense of forgiveness for her, for myself, for the complicated, beautiful life we'd shared. Later that afternoon, I decided to visit Tom, my oldest friend. We hadn't seen much of each other since the funeral, both of us retreating into our own grief. I called him, and he invited me over for coffee. His house was warm and cluttered, filled with the detritus of a life well lived. We sat in his kitchen, talking about old times, about our wives, about the strange, winding paths our lives had taken. At one point, Tom looked at me, his eyes serious. None of us really knows everything about the people we love. We think we do, but there are always things we don't see, things we don't understand. That doesn't mean the love isn't real, it just means we're human. I nodded, feeling the truth of his words. I told him, in broad strokes, about the letter I'd found, about the questions it had raised. He listened without judgment, his presence a comfort. "Do you regret finding it?" he asked quietly. I thought for a moment. "No, I think I needed to know. Not because it changes how I feel about her, but because it helps me understand her. And maybe it helps me understand myself, too." Tom smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. That's all any of us can hope for, isn't it? To understand, to forgive, to keep moving forward. We sat in silence for a while, the rain tapping against the windows, the world outside soft and gray. I realized that I was grateful for the questions, for the answers, for the chance to see my wife more clearly, even after she was gone. When I left Tom's house, the rain had stopped, and the sky was beginning to clear. I walked home slowly, feeling the weight of grief lighten, replaced by something softer, more bearable. I knew there would still be hard days, still be moments of doubt and sadness. But I also knew that I was not alone, that I was surrounded by love, by memory, by the quiet strength of those who cared for me. That night, I sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one. I thought about my wife, about Daniel, about the tangled web of love and loss that had brought me to this moment. I realized that life is not about having all the answers, but about learning to live with the questions, about finding beauty in the mystery. The days that followed settled into a gentle rhythm, each one a little easier than the last. I found comfort in small routines, watering the garden, walking to the corner bakery for fresh bread, calling Emily or Ben just to hear their voices. The ache of loss was still there, but it had softened, becoming something I could carry without stumbling. I began to notice the world again, the way sunlight filtered through the kitchen window in the morning, the sound of children playing in the street, the scent of lilacs blooming by the fence. One afternoon, as I was sorting through a box of old photographs, I came across a picture I'd never seen before. It was tucked behind a stack of family portraits, its edges worn and faded. In the photo, my wife stood on a rocky shoreline, the wind whipping her hair around her face. She looked younger, freer, her eyes bright with laughter. Beside her stood a man I didn't recognize, tall, with dark hair and a crooked smile. I stared at the photo for a long time, my heart pounding. Was this Daniel? Was this the man she'd written about? The man whose memory had lingered in the corners of her heart? I turned the photo over. On the back, in my wife's handwriting, were the words, Maine, 1989. The summer everything changed. I traced the letters with my thumb, feeling a strange mix of jealousy and gratitude. Jealousy for the part of her life I'd never known. Gratitude for the honesty of her memory. I realized that this photo, like the letter, was a piece of her story, a story that had shaped the woman I'd loved. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with the photo in front of me. I thought about the choices we make, the paths we take, the people who shape us. I wondered what would have happened if she'd chosen differently, if she'd stayed with Daniel, if our lives had never intersected. The thought made me ache, but it also made me grateful for the chance to love her, to build a life together, to share in her joys and sorrows. I decided to call Ben. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. We talked about his work, about the kids, about the little things that made up our days. I told him about the photo I'd found, about the questions it had raised. He listened quietly, his silence thoughtful. "Dad," he said finally, "I think we all have parts of ourselves we keep hidden. It doesn't mean we love the people in our lives any less. It just means we're human." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I know. I just wish I'd known her better. I wish I'd asked more questions, listened more closely." Ben was quiet for a moment. "Maybe that's something we can all learn from, to be more curious, more open, to really see the people we love, even when it's hard." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet house, the photo still in my hand. I realized that knowing everything about someone isn't what makes love real. It's the willingness to keep learning, to keep asking, to keep loving, even when the answers are complicated. The next day, I decided to visit the library. My wife had always loved books, and the library had been one of her favorite places. I wandered the aisles, running my fingers along the spines of novels and memoirs, poetry and history. I found myself drawn to a shelf of old travel guides, the kind she used to pore over when planning our family vacations. I pulled down a guide to Maine, flipping through the pages until I found a map of the coastline. I wondered if she'd stood on one of those beaches, if she dreamed of a different life. As I left the library, I felt a sense of connection to her, to the past, to the endless possibilities that life offers. I realized that grief is not just about letting go, but about holding on to the things that matter, about finding meaning in the memories we carry. That evening, I sat on the porch, the photo and the letter beside me. I thought about writing to Daniel again, about sharing the photo, about asking him to tell me his side of the story. But I hesitated. I realized that some questions are better left unanswered, that some mysteries are meant to remain. I decided instead to write in my own journal, to record my thoughts and feelings, to leave a piece of myself for my children to find one day. As I wrote, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, I realized that my wife's secrets did not diminish the love we'd shared. If anything, they made it richer, more complex, more real. I understood, finally, that love is not about possession or certainty, but about acceptance of ourselves, of each other, of the beautiful, tangled mess of life. A week later, I found myself drawn back to the attic, as if some unfinished business lingered among the boxes and dust. The air was thick and warm, sunlight slanting through the small window, illuminating motes that danced in the stillness. I sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by the artifacts of our life, baby clothes, school projects, Christmas ornaments, and more of my wife's journals. I realized I'd only scratched the surface of her story, and though I was nervous, I felt ready to know more. I opened a journal from the early 1990s, the year after we'd married. The entries were raw and honest, filled with the uncertainty of a young woman adjusting to a new life, a new identity as a wife. She wrote about missing her independence, about the fear of losing herself in the routines of marriage. She wrote about me, too, about my kindness, my steadiness, the way I made her feel safe, but there was a tension in her words, a sense of longing for something unnamed. As I read, I found an entry dated just a few days after our first anniversary. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd chosen differently, she wrote. If I'd stayed in Maine, if I'd given Daniel another chance. But then I look at him, at my husband, at the life we're building, and I know I made the right choice. Still, the past lingers, a shadow at the edge of my happiness. I closed the journal, my heart heavy but also strangely light. I realized that her doubts did not diminish our love. They made it more real, more human. We had both brought our histories into our marriage, both carried scars and dreams and regrets. I wondered if she'd ever sensed my own moments of uncertainty, the times I'd questioned my choices, the times I'd wondered if I was enough. I spent the afternoon sorting through more boxes, finding old letters from friends, birthday cards from the kids, a faded bouquet of dried flowers tied with a ribbon. Each item was a piece of our story, a reminder of the life we'd built together. I found myself smiling at the memories, even as tears pricked my eyes. Later, as I was closing up the attic, I found a small wooden box I'd never seen before. Inside was a collection of seashells, smooth and worn, each one labeled with a date and a place. Maine, 1989. Cape Cod, 1995. Outer Banks, 2002. I realized that my wife had carried these mementos with her, reminders of places she'd loved, moments she'd cherished. I wondered if she'd ever told me the stories behind them, or if they were secrets she'd kept for herself. That evening, I sat in the living room, the box of seashells on my lap. I thought about the ways we hold on to the past, the ways we carry our memories with us, sometimes in plain sight, sometimes hidden away. I realized that my wife's secrets were not betrayals, but acts of preservation, ways of honoring the people and places that had shaped her. I called Emily, feeling the need to connect. She answered on the first ring, her voice bright and warm. We talked about the kids, about her work, about the little frustrations and joys of daily life. I told her about the seashells, about the journals, about the things I was learning. Mom always loved the ocean, Emily said. She used to tell me that the sound of the waves made her feel at home, no matter where she was. I smiled, remembering the trips we'd taken to the coast, the way my wife would stand at the water's edge, her eyes closed, her face turned to the wind. I realized that I'd always thought of those moments as ours, but now I saw that they were hers, two private sanctuaries, places where she could be herself. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet, the sound of the ocean echoing in my memory. I realized that love is not about knowing every secret, but about respecting the mysteries that make us who we are. I felt a sense of gratitude for the years we'd shared, for the memories we'd made, for the chance to keep learning, even now. As night fell, I placed the box of seashells on the mantel, a small tribute to the woman I'd loved. I whispered a promise to keep searching, to keep asking, to keep loving her in all her complexity. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. The house was quiet, but instead of feeling empty, it felt full of possibility. I made breakfast and sat at the table, the seashell box nearby, the journal stacked neatly beside it. I realized that, for the first time since my wife's passing, I was looking forward rather than back. There was still sadness, still longing, but it was tempered by curiosity and a growing sense of acceptance. I decided to spend the day doing something my wife had always wanted to do but never found the time for: volunteering at the local community center. She'd talked about it often, especially after the kids left for college, but life always seemed to get in the way. I called the center and spoke to a woman named Linda, who welcomed me warmly and invited me to help with the afternoon meal service. The center was bustling when I arrived, filled with the sounds of laughter and conversation, the clatter of dishes, the aroma of soup simmering on the stove. I was put to work chopping vegetables, setting tables, serving food. The work was simple but satisfying, a reminder of the power of small acts of kindness. I found myself thinking of my wife, of the way she'd always found joy in helping others, in making people feel seen and valued. During a break, I sat with Linda and a few other volunteers, sharing stories over cups of coffee. They asked about my family, about my wife, about how I was coping. I found myself opening up, telling them about the letter, about the secrets I'd uncovered, about the journey I was on. They listened without judgment, offering comfort and understanding. Linda smiled gently. We all have parts of our lives that are private, things we carry alone. It doesn't mean we love our families any less. Sometimes it just means we're trying to protect them or ourselves. Her words echoed what Tom and Ben and Emily had said, but hearing them from a stranger made them feel newly true. I realized that my wife's secrets were not a rejection of me, but a reflection of her own humanity. She had loved me, loved our family, even as she carried the memory of another life. After the meal service, I walked home through the park, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the grass. I felt lighter, more at peace. I realized that I was beginning to forgive not just my wife, but myself, for the things I hadn't known, the questions I hadn't asked, the moments I'd missed. That evening, I sat at my desk and wrote in my journal. I wrote about the day, about the people I'd met, about the sense of connection I'd felt. I wrote about my wife, about the way she'd shaped me, about the ways I was still learning from her. I wrote about Daniel, about the gratitude I felt for the role he'd played in her life, about the acceptance I was finding. As I wrote, I realized that grief is not a straight line, but a winding path, full of detours and surprises. There are days when the pain is sharp, when the questions feel overwhelming. But there are also days of grace, of understanding, of unexpected joy. I realized that I could honor my wife's memory by living fully, by embracing the complexity of love, by choosing forgiveness over resentment. Before bed, I stood at the window, looking out at the quiet street. I thought about the years ahead, about the possibilities that still awaited me. I knew there would be more hard days, more moments of doubt and longing. But I also knew that I was not alone, that I was surrounded by love, by my children, by my friends, by the memory of the woman who had been my partner, my confidant, my home. I whispered a quiet good night, feeling her presence in the stillness, in the memories that filled the house, in the hope that was slowly returning to my heart. The days grew longer as spring edged into summer, and with each passing week, I found myself more at ease with the new shape of my life. The ache of loss was still there, but it had softened into something almost gentle, a companion rather than a tormentor. I spent more time outdoors, tending the garden my wife had loved, watching as the roses she'd planted years ago burst into bloom. Their colors were brighter than I remembered, their fragrance sweeter, as if they were blooming just for her. One afternoon, as I was pruning the rose bushes, Emily stopped by with her children. The kids ran through the yard, their laughter ringing out like music, while Emily sat beside me on the porch steps. We talked about everything and nothing, her work, the children's latest adventures, the small joys and frustrations of daily life. I realized how much I cherished these moments, how grateful I was for the family we'd built together. After a while, Emily grew quiet. She looked at me, her eyes searching. "Dad, do you ever wish things had been different? That you'd known more about Mom's past?" I thought about her question, about the letter, the journals, the photo from Maine. I thought about the secrets my wife had carried, the parts of herself she'd kept hidden. I realized that, for a long time, I'd been afraid of those secrets, afraid they meant I hadn't been enough, that our life together had been somehow incomplete. But now I saw things differently. I used to, I admitted, but I think I understand now. We all have parts of ourselves we keep private, It doesn't mean we love our families any less. Your mother loved us, loved you, and Ben loved me. That's what matters." Emily nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I think about that too, about the things I haven't told you or the kids. Maybe it's just part of being human." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the children chase fireflies as dusk settled over the yard. I felt a sense of peace, a quiet acceptance of the mysteries that would always be part of our lives. That night, after Emily and the kids had gone home, I sat at my desk and opened my journal. I wrote about the day, about the conversation with Emily, about the sense of closure I was beginning to feel. I wrote about my wife, about the love we'd shared, about the ways she continued to shape my life even in her absence. I found myself thinking about Daniel again, about the letter he'd written, about the role he'd played in my wife's story. I wondered if he'd ever found peace, if he'd ever let go of the love they'd shared. I realized that I no longer felt threatened by his memory. Instead, I felt grateful for the way he'd helped shape the woman I'd loved, for the happiness he'd given her, even if only for a little while. I decided, finally, to send the letter I'd written to Daniel. I didn't know if he would respond, or even if he was still at the same address. But it felt right, a way to honor the past while embracing the future. I sealed the envelope, wrote his name in careful script, and placed it on the hall table, ready to mail in the morning. As I prepared for bed, I walked through the house, turning off lights, checking locks, moving through the familiar rooms that held so many memories. I paused in the living room, looking at the box of seashells on the mantel, the photo from Maine tucked beside it. I realized that these mementos were not just reminders of the past, but symbols of the journey I'd taken, of the love I'd shared, the questions I'd asked, the answers I'd found. I stood at the window, looking out at the quiet street, the moonlight casting silver shadows on the lawn. I felt my wife's presence all around me, in the scent of the roses, in the laughter of our grandchildren, in the quiet strength that had carried me through the hardest days. I whispered a quiet thank you, a promise to keep living, to keep loving, to keep searching for meaning in the mysteries of life. As I climbed into bed, I felt a sense of hope, a belief that, even in the face of loss, there is always the possibility of new beginnings. I closed my eyes, letting the memories wash over me, grateful for the life I'd lived, for the love I'd known, for the chance to keep moving forward. The next morning dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through the curtains and filling the house with a gentle warmth. I woke with a sense of anticipation, as if the world was offering me a fresh start. After breakfast, I picked up the letter to Daniel and walked to the post office, the envelope tucked safely in my jacket pocket. The air was crisp, the sky a brilliant blue, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly present, aware of each step, each breath, each heartbeat. At the post office, I hesitated for a moment before sliding the letter into the slot. It felt like letting go of something heavy, like releasing a stone I'd carried for too long. I stood there for a moment, watching as the letter disappeared, and felt a quiet sense of relief. Whatever happened next, whether Daniel replied or not, I knew I'd done what I needed to do. I'd honored my wife's memory and my own need for understanding. On the walk home, I found myself noticing things I'd overlooked for months, the way the sunlight danced on the leaves, the laughter of children playing in a nearby yard, the scent of fresh-cut grass. I realized that life was still unfolding all around me, full of beauty and possibility. I felt a surge of gratitude for the years I'd shared with my wife, for the lessons I'd learned, for the chance to keep moving forward. When I got home, I called Ben. We talked for a long time, sharing stories and memories, laughing at old jokes, comforting each other in the quiet moments. I told him about the letter to Daniel, about the peace I felt in sending it. He listened, his voice steady and kind. "I'm proud of you, Dad," he said. "Mom would be too." After we hung up, I spent the afternoon in the garden, tending the roses, pulling weeds, planting new seeds. I thought about the future, about birthdays and holidays, about watching my grandchildren grow, about the possibility of new friendships, new adventures. I realized that grief would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I was more than my loss, more than my questions, more than the secrets I'd uncovered. That evening, Emily and the kids came by for dinner. We ate on the porch, the air warm and sweet, the sky painted with the colors of sunset. The children chased fireflies across the lawn, their laughter echoing in the twilight. Emily sat beside me, her hand resting on mine, her eyes shining with love and understanding. As darkness fell, I told them stories about their mother, about our early days together, about the adventures and misadventures that had shaped our family. I spoke honestly, not shying away from the complexities, the doubts, the moments of uncertainty. I wanted them to know that love is not always simple, that it is made richer by the mysteries we carry, by the choices we make, by the forgiveness we offer. When the evening ended and the house was quiet again, I sat on the porch, looking up at the stars. I thought about my wife, about Daniel, about the journey I'd taken since finding that strange letter in her purse. I realized that the letter had not shattered my world, but expanded. It had given me the chance to see my wife more fully, to understand her more deeply, to love her more completely. I whispered a final thank you into the night, a promise to keep living with an open heart, to cherish the memories, to embrace the unknown. I knew there would be more questions, more moments of longing, more days when the ache of loss would return, but I also knew that I was strong enough to face them, that I was surrounded by love, that I was, in the end, at peace.